so I'm going to make the most of it. Welcome to Evolution Hour. There are our patrons on the screen. I thank absolutely everybody that is helping out in the project, and I'm plugging away. We will proceed. Continuing with Replacing Darwin, bless its little heart, chapter 8, nearing the end of that. A momentous day has occurred with his bibliography. He has finally reached 300 sources, which is not exactly a hell of a lot. And that included several additional creationist ones. Part 2 of the show is going to involve some kamikaze caterpillars, and I'll be putting all the links in that into what we've got going on the show. So I'm trying to summarize as quickly as possible. So just in case our connection fails. Jeanson, oh, hi, Slade. Hi, I started up a little early because the connection looked damn good, and I don't know where the hell it'll be in another half hour or so. Anyway, Jeanson continues his happy-go-lucky genetic citations that he dribbled out in previous things, but he finally stuck in a few new ones that he hadn't cited previously. Unfortunately, they're all open access, so I'll be putting the links into them. He makes a big deal out of the fact that only 89.5% of the human DNA were used to align with. Well, yeah, which is kind of a misnomer because some segments are different than what they are in chimpanzees, and so why would you be trying to align them? But nonetheless, he brought up a bunch of papers that he probably shouldn't have done because he does this only in the footnotes. He doesn't discuss their content in the main segments. He's got the big 2005 chimpanzee genome study. Yes, sounding good so far. I've got all full stars on my signal. What the hell's going on right today? I have no idea. Anyway, the chimpanzee study from Nature, which happened to contain a very specific detail that Jeanson does not allude to, and that is, quote, orthologous proteins in human and chimpanzees are extremely similar, with 29% being identical when the typical orthologue differed by only 2 amino acids, 1 per lineage, all of which relates to how we have inherited material from primate ancestry and so forth and so on. Then there's a 2012 paper by Pruffer on the bonobo genome, our little cousins over in the chimpanzees, where the alignments there, quote, allow various aspects of the ancestry of the 2 ape species to be reconstructed, unquote. And there's the biogeography to consider. So you have the existing species in a very particular spot in Africa. Theoretically, they would have been on the ark. So how did they get back there, or for that matter, to the ark to get on board? He doesn't think about any of this stuff. If he's going to be bringing up a technical literature, he needs to deal with the data on it rather than just simply slipping it into a footnote. Remember, all of this is in a context that we've discussed previously, that Jeanson's primary assumptions are just flat out wrong. In the next coming weeks, we're going to be bumping into specific areas that I'll be looking to Dan Stern Cardinale's pieces, because he dove into very, very particular points as to how Jeanson's genetics are just wrong. He's confusing pedigrees and mutation rates and fixation rates and all of that, which a geneticist shouldn't be doing. But if you're ideologue, you're running amok on it. Then the third paper, also from 2012, is on the gorilla genome. And all 3 of these, by the way, are from Nature, and they've been put up as open access. So I'll be putting the links into those in due course. And that determined that the western and eastern species of gorillas had diverged, quote, 1.75 million years ago, but with evidence for more recent genetic change and a population bottleneck in the eastern species, unquote. Once again, all of those data needed to be accounted for in any detailed model of how the gorilla species, were there just one on the ark? Did the species originate? Is that physically possible in only a few thousand years? Can that be dealt with in terms of the biogeography? There's one thing after another in Jeanson's screed comes up the moment you start looking at the original technical literature. And the fact that he's burying this stuff in the background references, is showing part of the problem. The other part of the problem is he's suddenly invoking more creationists. So in the footnote, not up in the main text, as he finally hits 300 total sources, he drags in some stuff from Jeffrey Tomkins, a 2015 paper on the chimpanzee and human DNA, and a 2016 one on the chimpanzee genome again. And I'll be putting the links up to those so you can pay attention to those as you will. And if anybody can find any instance in which Tomkins is really making a persuasive case that needs to be dealt with, let me know. But it's basically repeating all of the arguments that he repeats all the way down the line. Part 2 of the show relates to an old post from Carl Whelan from 2013 on kamikaze caterpillars, his description, that CMI trotted out just a ways back, just recently. And it's about the role that a caterpillar plays in triggering a plant distress call, which is a fascinating example of biological symbiosis and all the rest. But Whelan cited only the science commentary on it, which I'll be putting the link up to, not the actual technical paper it was referring to, which also happens to be available, Ullman and Baldwin 2010. So I put that up, which brought up whether or not the scientists were going to be continuing their work. See, they were just looking into this fascinating bit of how the triggering of the plant defenses was brought on, and you would think that the caterpillar was actually inviting critters to start munching on the attack them and munch on the leaves and all that by triggering off the defense mechanisms of the plant. So this is why he was calling it a kamikaze caterpillar. But the point is that the researchers, as I suspected they might, hadn't stopped researching after Whelan in 2013. And in fact, Ullman's paper had found there was an upside to this seeming disadvantage, and it was acting as a way to home in on plants that didn't use that defense. In other words, what you've got are the vast majority of the caterpillars are going to plants where this is not a problem. There's no defense to trigger. And the whole point is that if you have a thing that triggers off the plant defense, that immediately reduces the prospect that you're going to be surviving and therefore helps contribute to the success of the ones that live on the plants that don't do that. So the failure to consider all the dynamics of what's going on, both from the plant's point of view and the predator's point of view and the caterpillar's point of view, is this thing that separates the genuine science that wants to figure out what's actually on versus the creationist that's just looking for gee whiz stuff. There's a part of our material. There's also a 2015 paper on this point that the moths that are the predators involved in here apparently have a tendency to muck around with their host chemicals in a bunch of different ways. And so we're looking at the tip of the iceberg about how intricate and complex the biological systems are, but still running from an evolutionary point of view. So that puts our material on there. I don't know whether or not Jackson will be showing up or not, because normally the timing is for 7 o'clock, and I put the link in, and if he arrives, fine, excellent, he would be totally welcome. I was spending earlier today, I'll fill you in on some of the exciting material for Rocks for Their Volume 2 that I'm currently working on, the Big Slosh chapter. It's a doozy. And there's a whole backlog of material. I've got about 30 years worth of creationist literature that I had accumulated in my files, of which it was organized in no particular way until ramrodding it through to sort everything out so that we can stick them into these recent books. So I'm pulling out all the material that relates to the global flood, to animal predation, to supposed longevity of human beings, and all the geological material from the various things. It's all sorted out in a mass. As Colton and I saw when they were up here before we went down to the Grand Canyon, they could see this massive material that I had as a fire hazard downstairs, getting everything sorted out for it. And so what should be, as you've already discovered, all of you who have Volume 1 and the companion work, Evolution Slam Dunk, I try to pull together not only the current technical literature and the creationist arguments that are recent, but also a bit of the history about how this stuff has changed. Because one thing that creationists don't like to talk about is how their views have not been fixed. That over time, sometimes they give up on a doctrine or move around to new points of view. So that I was just researching today some material to pull in the stuff on the carnivory issue, that it was a dogma in young earth creationism starting in the Henry Morris era, that tooth and claw carnivory only came in after the flood. And for many decades, that was the case. But in recent years, creationists have been backpedaling on that. You've got the new generation of people who actually have some paleontology training, like Todd Wood and Kurt Wise and all the rest. And they know full well that there is a slew of evidence for carnivory in the fossil record directly, with predation marks and tooth marks and all sorts of stuff. So they've begun to backpedal on the idea that carnivory was originally just a result of the fall. And in fact, some of the arguments that it's like designed into the creation means that what, God knew that Adam was going to fall before doing it? Well, there you're into the theodicy problems of trying to make any sense out of the Genesis narratives. Anyway, it's the chapter is going to be a full and comprehensive discussion of the various mythologies that went into flood stories. There's going to be a complete appendix. It grew to the point where it needs to be an appendix, which is going into the high points of the supposed flood legends around the world. And it's not that there aren't flood legends from around the world. It's that, are they the Noah's Ark story? And the creationist dogma is that there was only the Noah flood, and that anybody that's got a flood story basically had to have got it from their remembrances of the original tale. Hi, Beej. Yeah, for some, the miracles of the non-gods are, my connection's been running at 100% since about 6:15, and so I'm running with it, even though I'm on the air early. We can see what we got going. Yeah, Beej is absolutely right. They're different time too in local floods. And so what I'm going to be doing in the Big Slosh chapter, or the appendix on this, is a breakdown of some of the bigger issues about the various nationalities involved. Some of them clearly are coming from tidal waves. Some of them are clearly relating to the all the ones up with the Nez Perce and the Coeur d'Alene tribes and all of that up in my neck of the woods. That's the Missoula floods. That they knew about this stuff. And then there's the other factor, is that a great deal of the material is hyped by people relying on preachers to tell them what the legends were. So you've got a long tradition of ministers coming in and recounting the tales, or even ethnographers coming in and recounting the tales, and forgetting the fact that there were missionaries that had gone through there earlier, and that these ideas start percolating and revising and adjusting. So there are clear instances of where biblical stories about Noah's drunkenness and a lot of other stuff got infused into local culture by the action of missionaries, of which activity here often went on for centuries. And it wasn't just, hit and miss kind of a thing. Then, of course, there are also cases of people just making shit up, like the Fuhi story from China that comes from Byron Nelson back in the 1930s and got picked up by Duane Gish. It's sort of gotten put by the wayside nowadays. And so what I'll be doing in that appendix is tracing through some of the systematics of who is copying who, and or Fu, as the case may be. How many of them are relying on Gish? Most of the modern ones aren't doing that, although there's a particular post from one of Gish's kids' book that has been copied verbatim by a bunch of websites, usually not mentioning where they got it from. And that parasitical quality comes in a lot. The one nice thing that I was really thrilled about was the fact that so much of the original primary source documents, the books that the creationists have been relying on for these things, are open access now. And so I was able to acquire them, and I was able to look at the original sources, and I'm able to find out what they were leaving out or misrepresenting. And this is true for Aboriginal flood tales, which really don't have much to do with the Noah's Ark story. And the various South American and Central American tales. There's some really neat workmanship that's been done in the scholarly field recently to recognize that not just creationists were kind of going overboard on this, that there was a tendency among ethnographers, particularly among Mesoamerican cultures, that they really tended to look at anything with raindrops and lakes and crocodiles and stuff as being some sort of cataclysmic destruction of the end of the world thing. And now that we can read more of their texts and others, some of the stuff just refers to like rain, and other things refer to, oh, the lake is dangerous. There are crocodiles that live there, alligators and stuff. So they are probably going to have to wean themselves off of this knee-jerk reaction, which I suppose is the opposite of what had happened earlier in the 1930s, when a lot of the ethnographers bent over backwards not to see bloodletting and carnage and stuff in the Mayans. They tended to view them as a terribly benign thing, and that anything that was happening, showing that sort of thing, wasn't really real. It was just part of their mythology. So there's a seesaw going on as different cultural tropes come in as times change. And the main thing is try to figure out what the actual people do. There's even an example that I'll be alluding to in the book of an unresolved mystery about what a particular image refers to, that's been associated by creationists with Eve, from Adam and Eve, and the snake and the Cain slewing Abel. Supposedly this image in Mesoamerican codex. And the problem is I can't find any corroboration that the image exists, but trying to figure out what it means is the problem, because the god that it was associated with, supposedly, according to von Humboldt back in 1814, I can't find any corroboration for why he identified it quite as it was, and it doesn't fit in with any of the modern mythology listings as to what various gods had for images associating with them. This particular one holds like a red bird, and there's a bug on top. It looks like maybe a spider or something. None of those tropes seem to show up. Plus, an awful lot of the Mesoamerican cultures had a lot of variety in how they depicted the gods and what imageries that they used. And so the idea that there was the image that you could use to catalog it, much more complicated than that. So anyway, it's really fun how much information. Oh, yes, the the China one ended up in Mythology for Children books from years ago. Yes, there's the whole Fuji story and Emperor Yu, the Chinese myths, and again, the material has gotten to be quite sophisticated on this. And there's also some recent archaeological work that's been trying to pin down there actually is catastrophic flooding on the Yangtze River, and it dates from around the right time. I think 1200 BC, something like that. That fits in nicely with the dating of the Warring States period when this Emperor Yu was supposedly around. But it wasn't a Noah's Ark style story of where people are sticking animals on the ark and to preserve them because the world was going to be destroyed. No, it's because the canals were failing, that some doofus bureaucrat screwed up and didn't keep the river flood control system running, and the levees broke, and all hell breaks loose, and the flood comes out, and the minister of works, Yu, comes in and sets things to right, and he fight. In fact, one of the other legends, the Miao people, that has gotten filtered into the creationist literature in a very, very narrow niche, in a one oddball version that this Truax guy, this Reverend Truax, had supposedly preserved, and no one can find any corroboration for it outside of this one version that appeared in Answers in Genesis years ago. That ironically, the Mao people fit in to this Yu legend as well, because he supposedly defeated them when they were raising a ruckus and that. So it's all about the warring period, dynastic period. It doesn't bear any resemblance to the flood story, and makes sense perfectly within the notion that the Yangtze floods a bit. There's going to be a lot of really neat material on the Harappa culture. There's going to be a lot of stuff on the technical literature on the various genetics and the monsoon cycles and the relationship between that and the desertification of the Sahara. I mean, there's just a lot of stuff going on that connects up to all this. There's going to be tons of other material that I'd planned to put into the Big Slosh chapter, but it turns out that it will belong much better in other sections on Precambrian glaciations and the Grand Canyon element, and that's going to relate to the Mesozoic and dinosaurs. And so I'll be dribbling that material in to the chapters that Jackson will be writing, because he's going to be covering so much of that area from the point of view of the evolution of life in those areas. And we're going to have stuff on the paleo worlds. It's going to be one hell of a book that's going to be a beautiful complement to the first story, because it's dealt with an awful lot of issues, and you would think, well, we've sure covered that in 900 pages. There can't be anything left. No, there's just tons of stuff. Plus, there will be a breakdown of the arc encounters list. Erica will be an excellent confirmation cross-reference, because I had a fairly high-resolution photograph of the stupid list that's up at the arc encounter. It's suspicious about the fact that the creationists have never put a posting of it. Oh, oh yeah, the bit about the mega hurricanes. Even then, yes, they can trace the monsoon cycle actually quite precisely. Erica just did and we'll be alluding to it in the new book, the video that she did on the fact that they can tell from the Spelothem cave data the monsoon cycle and the oscillations that take place with this because of the orbital eccentricities of the Earth. It's over like a 20,000 year cycle. And the thing is that they're complementary. So when it's one cycle in the southern hemisphere, it's the opposite mode up in the northern hemisphere, and that this ping pongs back and forth, and you can synchronize the stuff from Brazil with the stuff from China going back tens of thousands, 100,000 years or more. And either those correlations have to be thrown out the window, or they have to be compressed super duper fast. What? So the Earth is wobbling really, really quick, because that's what's causing it all. So it's a mess. Also on the mega hurricane thing, hypercanes figure in some of the creationist models to account for stuff during the flood. It's part of their little ad hoc repertoire on this area, but needless to say, they're having as much problem with that as they are with the heat problem and any of the other matters in there. In the course of the work, I'm trying to make sure that when we bring up topics that were alluded in the first volume, there will be a direct reference in the new book to, as we discussed in volume 1, and so forth and so on, so everybody can use them back and forth as companion pieces. Anyway, the arc encounter will have a full appendix that I'll be able to cross-check finally to give an actual listing of all the damn kinds that were supposedly on Noah's Ark. And it's not a big list. It's like 1,400. But what's interesting about it, Erica, bless her, had gone through and very carefully listed everything off. And so there are some spots in my photograph that are kind of, there's a lens flare that covers over some of the spots. So I wasn't able to find out exactly what those are. Well, I'm able to interpolate those because of Erica's list. Now, the fun part is why the list is in the order that it is. And anybody that can see, you can see the picture in a low res format, even on the website for the Ark Encounter. But they're clustered together by reptiles living and extinct, and mammals living and extinct, and birds living and extinct. That's how they organized it. But within each list, why are they organized in the way they are? Since every single one of them is supposedly a separate kind, they can't have any relationship to each other, right? Why aren't they in alphabetical order then? Why are they in such a peculiar order? Well, it's because they're going through, as far as I can determine, like Wikipedia's taxonomy list. So whatever families are together in that little subgroup in there, that's the order that they're putting them in the Ark Encounter. And then there will be the matter of why some of them are what they are, why certain of them are listed as separate kinds or not. Dapper Dino has brought up some oddities about stuff, and Erica has brought up some oddities. And so that's all areas that we're going to be putting in as a breakdown, and that will list the Ark Encounter listing on the one hand as a listing in the order they give it at the Ark Encounter, and then so it can be useful for people, organized alphabetically so that you can actually find a particular kind in there. And then they'll also be clustered in terms of why they are systematically the way they are. And so I think this will be a really useful reference point for anybody that wants to investigate the Ark Encounters version of baraminology, which is hands down the smallest list of created kinds that I've ever seen. There's been there's sort of two curves in the history of systematics. One is the number of animals that were known when systematics was starting up at the time of Linnaeus. And it gets bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger and bigger, and it balloons into the thousands and the tens of thousands and the hundreds of thousands in a relatively short time, because the naturalists that are running amok in the 18th and 19th centuries just went berserk to catalog everything that they could. And so in the plant kingdom and animal kingdoms and all the rest, it ballooned. So it very quickly became difficult to envisage kinds as species aboard the ark. And then you don't really start getting people thinking it through closely until the 20th century in the creationist movement. And the notable first off the mark would be John Woodmarapp's, in fact, I've got his stupid little book here, Noah's Ark, a feasibility study, which is way less detailed than it needs to be, given the scale of the subject that they're supposedly dealing with. But at any rate, he's really talking about tens of thousands of kinds. And I guess he thought if they could all be averaged down to the size of a sheep and packed in there tightly enough, that it might work. But when they got around to doing the Ark encounter a generation later, it was looking really unfeasible. And so the number of kinds had gotten smaller and smaller and smaller, to the point of where they're pretty well settled in on the 1,500 kind-ish, which is roughly the family level. I say roughly because they're in a box for us, because we are in the primate families along with Bonzo the chimp and all the rest. And so naturally they can't allow that. And Erica's last video that she did on Sinclair and Wood's latest paper on Australopithecus sediba and that being within the human holobaramon, that she's aware of, and highlights that fact that you've got this schizoid quality where the kind is either a family or not when it comes to us. There's another area where they're in trouble relating to frogs, because a great many frog genera are given their own distinctive family because they're just the little remnants of a very long period of amphibian evolution. And so there's an awful lot of frog genera that are only known at the generic level in the living world that are sufficiently distinct that they're given a family designation. Yeah. Well, there you've got the wing kind, the multi-legged kind. Yeah. It's precisely because they don't think much about insects at all. And A and B, oh gosh, a lot of insects. You're talking hundreds of thousands of species. So it's so relentless to try to work through this creationist taxonomy there. There are relatively few creationists that are even kind of moderately expert in the area. Over in the intelligent design side, I see no inclination that Gunter Beckley, who is a fossil insect guy, is ever going to go around to work out what created kinds are there created kinds, or is it all just evolution, except where it isn't? And please don't ask him too much more on that. But yeah, there's a great divide. Well, I can't quite say great divide. It's the small group that thinks about it, and then the bigger group that doesn't think about it. And that is whether there were insects on the ark at all. And the preferred mode is, let's just not have insects on the ark, because that way we don't have to figure out how many kinds there are. Thank you. And so the general principle is the idea that they somehow or other are surviving in the cataclysm of the flood and then going back to their business as usual, apparently. Termites and ants and bees and katydids and all the rest. And there's not an enormous amount of thinking on this subject. The idea that a lot of the insects are comfortably waterproof will come as a shock to anybody that has managed to flush a bug down the drain and knowing that bye-bye, because you don't live well in water, do you? Certainly there are some insects that have, mosquitoes and that have an aquatic component to the way they function and all that. Is there more than one ape kind on their list? The M-wing. Yeah. Interestingly, well, again, we'll go into that in full detail when I do the big master listing on it. But Erica was spotting the fact that in the woodwork, the hominids as a family, the Homidae, are conspicuously absent. All the other ape families are noted in the creationist literature and in his analysis, but not the Hominidae, which includes our close cousins and us. And so they get very, very dicey about how they want to handle all of that stuff. Any of the systematics, of course, has got to ignore most of the data. Wise and Wood really already were in the approach of just bypassing the genetic data a lot and parsing it down, usually involving other people's data fields. I don't see any sign that Wood and Kavanaugh and Wise are really keen in constructing from the ground up their own systematic data sets. If those of you who have read systematic papers will probably have encountered at the back end a giant list of things with numbers on them. So there would be like often 50, 100, 200, 300 character states, and every one of them has little things that seem boring as dishwater. There would be a character state 44 and a brief description of it, and then it's 0/0/1/0/. And so what all of these are actually matrices details that are used to plug into a cladistic analysis. And that kind of rigor, if those who read Evolution Slam Dunk there will see my analysis of good old John Woodmarap's attempt to take down cladistic analysis. And I go into how he's misrepresenting those funky little numbers because I had to go through and manually reconstruct the master charts that he did not supply in his article based on the original technical literature, which I had to glean. Thank you, Dr. Liu from the Carnegie Institute, who thankfully sent me all the various papers that I had requested. And so I was able to actually look at the original technical literature. This was like, I originally did the analysis back in like 2006 or so. And that was before so much of this stuff was available online to where I wouldn't have to have gone that route. But, you know, tougher maneuver. I totally revamped the analysis, by the way, that I had done in 2006 when I did Slam Dunk, because I now knew more about cladistic analysis by that time, and I could spot errors that Woodmarap was making that I didn't spot when I first did the study back in 2006. And so that gave me a little back pat on the fact that I'm learning shit and figuring out a little bit more precise. Oh, hi, Lamont. Hello, how are you doing? This a long time no see for a signal that actually fits. This has been a absolutely trouble-free 100% signal that I'm absolutely flabbergasted. Maybe because the Russians are prevented from spewing jerk brain crap on Ukraine is cut down on the signal traffic on the network. I don't know what the circumstances is, but for once the signal is going really fine, so I'm making the most out of it. I put the thank you card up right at the very beginning of the show, and remember all of the papers in that I'm alluding to will be put in there. And I do hope people will dive in if it's particularly on a topic that you find neat. Dive into it, including the creationist material, because I'm only one person, and everybody that gets in the game, especially if they can get to the point where they're looking at things from a source methods direction and doing their own specialized thing and bringing their own specialized knowledge in there, just as I would expect BrainBug to be able to tackle bug stuff on a level that I wouldn't be able to do, just as Erica can do hominin material way more proficiently than I can, and Dan Stern-Cardinale can handle the genetics way better than I can. But I can act as a clearinghouse. Anyway, hopefully that we will be able to get volume 2 out of the way this year, and it will be I'm the one that handles the indexing and bibliography aspects to keep that coordinated. I learned enough from the previous books to realize that you have to compile an index on the fly before it's even to the stage where you're putting in the actual page numbers, but you have to have the listing indexed and stuff to speed up the process, because it's just gobsmackingly tough. You easily forget to bring up topics, and eyes can glaze over and not bring up things. But our principle that we started, particularly in volume 1, was the idea that there would be every single scientist name would be fully listed in the main book. And so it would make it as easy as possible to locate it, and it would be fully indexed, and there would be references to the main topics and subtopics and all that stuff with cross-referencings and that to make it as easy to find stuff. And because so much new material is popping along, that 300 sources in replacing Darwin is pretty hilariously small, given the fact that just the chapter I'm working on has way more sources than that. Just the segment that I've gotten in the bibliography so far is about an 80-page bibliography, with each page being like about 25 or so sources. So that's just from not yet completely done chapter. And when I get all the additional material in, when I get all that additional material in on the soft tissue matter and the radiocarbon dating of ancient critters and all that kind of stuff, that's going to be part of that as well. I've got a great big stack of material that'll be sorted into that little element. So it will be a delightful source. So while we're running off for 36 minutes and we are almost to the time when I would normally be starting, any questions out there in audience land, since I'm actually able to be heard clearly and the signal strength? Let me check my little Wi-Fi, make sure going on. Yeah, we're still about half power on that. We're okay. Phew. Well, never. Don't worry about everything having to relate to anything, Lamont. There's a lot of it has to do with just winding down the brain. Although you never can tell what interesting stuff would come in from odd areas. Every once in a while, when I'm working on paralogs of fog stuff as my little sidebar for novels, I'm nearly done on that. I'm on chapter 34 of 37. I'll sometimes encounter historical material that actually bears surprisingly on the rocks were there project. Sometimes the other way around, I will be encountering stuff that relates to the science material up in the book, and suddenly I'm realizing, ooh, that's actually an interesting little tidbit that will fit in the historical stuff in the science fiction angle that I can deal with. So it's surprising, the material that pops up from one direction or another that can be quite surprising. The main course is always run with the source methods approach. Never take anybody's word for anything. Don't take my word for anything. You know, I hope you discovered that I tend to be pretty reliable, but still ask for sources. That's why I'm so stickler on putting in full text links to the various topics that I bring up, so that nobody needs to take my word for it. You can check it out for yourself. And if you can find something that confutes a point that I'm trying to raise, well, bring it to my attention. I'd be absolutely. What you get from creationist tendency is just to fire the dogmas back. And all they're doing is cribbing material in SFT mode from the various people involved. Well, excuse me, I don't need somebody to tell me what Nathaniel Jeanson thinks. I'm reading Nathaniel Jeanson directly. So we need to move beyond that. Thank you very much. But anyway, I strongly recommend that anybody with a particular axe to grind and have an interest in a particular topic in an area of your own personal expertise, please proceed. And so if you've got stupid camera like this or a web blog or whatever, and you discover stuff, make it available to people and put up a posting on it and call attention to it and make a point of putting up the links to things so you can what's going on. Very good question. Have we had to edit anything in volume 2 because the data? There will be the opening chapter of the book will be an update in the sense that there's a lot of newer information that's come along. There's nothing that has come along since the first book came out 2 years ago that requires a retraction on anything. At most, it's, oh, here's more information on this particular topic. And we'll be bringing material in relating to any of the issues that we discussed first time around in an opening chapter, and it'll all be clustered together. And there's other matters where it's effectively material that's being in art. Because, in fact, I realized to my chagrin, if you look in the chapter on geology in the first book, that it's listed as one title in the main table of contents, but when you actually get to it, it still says Tales from the Big Slosh, because that's what that chapter was originally going to be called. And when we decided to split the books up, that now became its own chapter in the new book, but I forgot to change the damn title. So all of you who have the original book will have chapter 7 inaccurately titled at the beginning of the chapter. If I eventually do a new, if we do an illustrated edition or some such thing, all the little typographical errors that are popped along in the fields when weeding out, so that if we do a reissue of it, it would be corrected on that. Oh, yeah. Well, sometimes there's can be reasons why an 80s or 90s source is irrelevant to do. Obviously, if you're looking at a creationist who is citing a particular paper and they're misrepresenting it, it doesn't matter when it came out. If it's being misrepresented, that's a pure issue. In other areas, the very fact that it's an older paper can raising alarm bells. A lot of the time that takes is in doing the writing is follow-up to where I would be looking up older sources and finding out whether they're still available online. And for example, the Rocky Mountain Creation Science Association, I had a whole slew of material that I had downloaded from them back in the day, 2009, 10, 11, that period. And when I tried to find whether they, what the web link was for them currently, it turns out they decided to archive it for like 2011 or so. So all of that stuff became obsolete. And although once in a while we'll be mentioning a website that's just interesting, but there's no way for you to check up on it because it's based on hard copy material that no longer exists. It's defunct. However, in the course of looking up the addresses that were no longer there because they didn't archive stuff, they do archive more recent material. And I discovered not one but 2 lectures, videos to boot, that are now on YouTube that I was able to locate on the various lecturers on Noah's Ark from 2018 and 2021 that have lectured to them. And so that turned out to be quite interesting because it related one of them to who was discussing the Nami issue or not. For those of you who haven't heard of it, I don't think we alluded to it in the book 1. The Nami is a group of Noah's Ark aficionados who insist they found the interior of the Ark surprisingly intact, buried down in a crevasse in ice. And a great many creationists think it's a fraud, that it's built like a movie set and it's completely not legit. But the interesting thing is this one 2018 lecturer doesn't mention Nami at all. So that's clearly showing how all that is. And then it doesn't show up in the 2021 guy because he doesn't even think that the Ark is on Noah on Ararat at all. He favors a different location, or at least not Ararat. And so we'll be filling everybody in on the skivvy of the ins and outs of archaeology and who the major characters are and the constant hype involved. And you even get a connection with Islamic creationism that's part. It bumps into them because it's good for business. I mean, it's like a tourist business. And one of the guys, the 2018 lecturer, was saying about that they were paying like $100,000 a pop to be able to go over and dig and do the little ground penetrating radars and all that kind of stuff. over there in Turkey, which is often a dicey area because it's close to the Russian border and all that kind of stuff. And so it's a troubled area, and Kurdish rebels have been running amok and all that. So it's not always easy for people to do it. But in recent years, the area has settled down enough that they're just happy as clams. The creationists come over and hunt for Noah's Ark because it's good for business. And tourists come in, and it's probably going to go, if things settle down eventually there even more, it'll go the route of the people that have Loch Ness monster lore and Ogopogo and UFOs at Area 51 and all that Sedona and all that. It'll be tourist attractions, and there will be hotels, and you can come in and wander around and do your own ark hunt. And thank you very much. And please enjoy the spa and have a nice meal and pick up some trinkets, and all major credit cards accepted, and so forth and so on. And so we can anticipate how that's going to go. But in all of these decades and decades and decades, with ups and downs, at least since the 1970s, which is now 50 years worth, they've found absolutely diddly squat. And then one of which, Ron Wyatt and his stupid rock formation that he insists, and there's still a bunch. Kent Hovind pops down this rabbit hole every once in a while. There's a thing that's just as obvious a rock formation as you could possibly imagine, and that somehow or other they think it's like the mold of the ark, or maybe the ark itself, and it's just Looney Tunes stuff. Anyway, so we've been on 46 minutes, and I think this covers all the little bases, and at least people will catch up on it afterwards. Advantage of yes, well, that's like some of the lecturers on there are aware of the fact that wood lasts that long, and so even 4,500 years is a stretch. So it's a feature that a remarkable level with others, and they're an intriguing bunch, and by and large, people, I think you'd probably have with them in a bar and jawing back and forth on it to be terribly truculent people. They're not as prickly as some annoying creatures, certainly not as prickly and annoying as I am. You see, I would never think about that. Anyway, yes, wait, Ogopogo isn't real? Yeah, I hate to disillusion you, and neither is Champ from Lake Champlain or any of the other assortment. Although the romantic in me would just be loving it if there was some giant aquatic snake or some remnant plesiosaur or something hanging around, and I can guarantee you any paleontologist would practically hawk their grandmother access to a living plesiosaur. So I mean, let it. But all of that cryptozoology crap, there's a bit of discussion of that because they're creationists, and Kent Hovind is yet another example who keeps bringing this crap up. People who think that they're basking sharks when they're picked up pieces of those are actually remnant plesiosaurs, and the supposed painting plesiosaur that was being attacked by enemies that was painted in the 1950s. I mean, it's just messy. We got all that kind of stuff. Anyway, trying to start dicey, so I think this is about the right excellent time to end up. Everybody get the books if you don't have them, and tell everybody about and if they can join in as a patron to the project, it's well appreciated, and you can personal experience that I'm not wasting their money. I'm working hard. So thank you all for coming in. Everybody stay safe, and catch you next week, and hopefully we'll have a good connection then too. Bye.